We live in a world where there is more access to information than ever before. Generations, young and old, are being exposed to radically different ideologies and opinions every day. It can be so overwhelming trying to decipher what's true and what's false. But there is a way. Join me as we discuss some of the toughest questions out there about Christianity, the Bible, and culture. I'm your host, Nick Lackey. Welcome to The Garrison. Hey everyone, I'm glad you're joining me for today's episode of The Garrison. In the last podcast, I said that the most important question in life was, is God real? And if you come to the conclusion that he is, the next follow-up question would be, what am I going to do about it? So today we're going to get into it. Last week we talked about the decline of Christianity in the West, and a big reason for this was the intellectual stumbling blocks that people came upon. They maybe thought that science was contradictory with Christianity, but today we're going to be talking about the evidence for a creator of the universe. And what evidence do we have? You know, I often hear that God is a fairy tale that people make up to make themselves feel good, or religion is something that people make up to give themselves hope, but this isn't true. And I do believe that Christianity is scientific. So here we go. And we're going to start with the very first verse of the Bible, which is Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So there we have it. The Bible clearly states that God created the heavens and the earth. In other words, God has created everything. And this is the Christian worldview, that he is the creator of the universe, of space and time and matter and everything that we know and we see today. So, is this just a theory or a fairy tale that people have made up, or is it actually scientifically backed? And I often think to myself, if Christianity is really true, then surely we'd be able to see the evidence for it all around us, and I truly believe that we do. So, we'll start with just stating a few things. The first thing is that we know that either the universe is infinite, in other words, it never had a beginning and it won't have an end, it's infinite or eternal, or the thing which caused the universe was infinite, right? These are the only two options. In other words, it has always existed and it had no beginning. This is the universe, or the thing that created the universe is the being or the thing which is infinite. It can't be, they can't both not be infinite, or they can't both be infinite. It's one or the other. And so what was it? Was it the universe that's always been and always will be, or was it the thing that was before the universe, the thing which caused the universe to come into existence? And there cannot at one time have ever been a thing that existed which was nothing. Nothing can ever have existed, or they can't have at any moment in time. Well, I mean, time is something in itself, so it is a wee bit of a tricky thing to get your head around, but there must have always existed something, whether that was the universe or it was the thing which created the universe. Now, you may have heard this name, but Richard Dawkins is renowned as one of the most influential atheists out there today. If you do a quick Google search of famous atheists or most influential atheists, or maybe the famous biologists today, it will bring him up on the radar. And Richard Dawkins, he has been the author of many anti-God or anti-Christian books, such as The God Delusion or Outgrowing God. And many atheists would hold him as one of the greats in the scientific community. Now, despite his reputation, Richard, he makes a bizarre claim. He believes nothing created something, which is a scientific impossibility. But then he goes on to explain that nothing is something, which is pretty contradictory. In a discussion between Richard Dawkins, who is this evolutionary biologist, and Cardinal George Pell, who's the former Catholic Archbishop of Sydney, they're having a discussion, and here's what Richard Dawkins says about nothing. He says, of course it's counterintuitive that you can get something from nothing. Of course, common sense doesn't allow you to get something from nothing. That's why it's interesting. It's got to be interesting in order to give rise to the universe at all. Something pretty mysterious had to give rise to the origin of the universe. You can see what he's just done there. He's just said you can get something from nothing, but then he goes on to say that something pretty mysterious had to give rise to the origin of the universe. In other words, he is now trying to define nothing. And in this discussion, it's quite, the audience actually laughs at this. And then Richard, he says, well, what's so funny? Why is everybody laughing? And then George Pull, he says, well, I think it's pretty funny that you're trying to define nothing. And I agree with that. You know, if we try to define nothing and then give it some sort of characteristics, then it's no longer nothing. It becomes something. And so I think this is the problem with a lot of atheistic worldviews, is that they believe that there is no God or that there is no higher power, yet at the same time, common sense cannot accept that conclusion. Common sense won't allow us to, because we know that nothing cannot create anything. So therefore, there must have had to be something. And again, either the universe is eternal and it's always existed, in which case it never needed a creator, or the thing before the universe, in which Christians would call God, is the thing which has no creator and it's infinite or eternal. Anyway, back to our question. Is the universe infinite, or was there something before the universe? So what we're going to look at now is the cosmological argument. And it's the argument which argues for a beginning of a universe, and saying that everything which has a beginning has a beginner, or something which caused it. And if the universe has a beginning, therefore there must have been something to have caused it. And I read a book at the start of last year. The book was called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And it was by Dr. Frank Turek and Norman Geisler. And I want to give all credit to this book for the next few points I'm going to make, because this is where I learnt them. And I'm also going to be quoting out of this book. So at the start of the book, when they're going through this cosmological argument, the authors, they bring up an acronym called SURGE. Okay, now SURGE, it's spelled S-U-R-G-E, and each letter will represent some bit of scientific evidence which points us to the conclusion that there is a beginning of the universe, and therefore, if there was a beginning of the universe, there would have been something to cause it to begin, or something which brought forth the beginning of the universe. And so, the S in SURGE stands for the second law of thermodynamics, and I'm just going to read from the book. It says, the second law of thermodynamics is the S in our SURGE acronym. Thermodynamics is the study of matter and energy, and the second law states, among other things, that the universe is running out of usable energy. With each passing moment, the amount of usable energy in the universe grows smaller, leading scientists to the obvious conclusion that one day all the energy will be gone and the universe will die. Like a running car, the universe will ultimately run out of gas. And so this is the first bit of evidence that we have that there was a beginning, because if the universe is going to be running out of usable energy, then it cannot have ever been infinite, because if it was infinite, then it would have already run out of usable energy. And so if it's got a limited amount of energy to be used, then it must have had a starting amount of energy, which is now slowly running out, which goes to show that there was most likely a beginning. Now that was the S in SURGE. The next one goes to show that the universe is expanding. And this was detected by Edwin Hubble in 1929. You may have heard of the Hubble Space Telescope. We'll go back to the book. This is what it says. Good scientific theories are those that are able to predict phenomena. I'll say that again. Good scientific theories are those that are able to predict phenomena that have not yet been observed. As we have seen, general relativity predicted an expanding universe, but it wasn't until legendary astronomer Edwin Hubble looked through his telescope more than a decade later that scientists finally confirmed that the universe is expanding, and that it's expanding from a single point. Now again, if the universe is expanding, then it must have had a start point to this expansion. If it was an infinite universe, then we wouldn't have been able to detect that it was expanding. A bit like if you blow a balloon up and it expands, you know that there must have been a point in which the balloon was deflated or it didn't have any air in it. And then you started to expand it when you blew into it, and you knew that it had a beginning to its expansion. And it's the same with the universe. So that's the second piece of evidence. The R in the radiation afterglow stands for... the R in SURGE stands for the radiation afterglow. And again, we'll go back to the book to see what it says. The third line of scientific evidence that they had discovered a beginning was an accident. It was by accident in 1965. That's when Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson detected strange radiation on their antenna at Bell Labs in Holmdel, New Jersey. No matter where they turned their antenna, the mysterious radiation remained. Technically known as the cosmic background radiation, this afterglow is actually light and heat from the initial explosion. This light is no longer visible because of its wavelength has been stretched by the expanding universe to wavelengths slightly shorter than those produced by a microwave oven. But the heat can still be detected. As early as 1948, 3 scientists predicted that this radiation would be out there if the Big Bang did really occur. But for some reason, no one attempted to detect it before Penzias and Wilson stumbled upon it by accident nearly 20 years later. Now, this one's, for me anyway, was probably one of the most confusing things to understand. So I'm going to read out another excerpt from a website called newscientist.com, which is, it's not a Christian website, and this is what they say about this radiation afterglow. Observational evidence to confirm the idea that the universe had a very dense beginning came in October 1965, with the discovery of a faint background of microwaves through space. The only reasonable interpretation is that this cosmic microwave background is radiation left over from an early hot and dense state. As the universe expanded, the radiation cooled until it became just the remnant we see today. The theory soon backed up this idea. So that is the third bit of evidence from this acronym SURGE, that there was a beginning of the universe. Fourth one is called the Great Galaxy Seeds. That's what the G stands for. And I'm going to read from the book again. After finding the predicted expanding universe and radiation afterglow, scientists turned their attention to another prediction that would confirm the Big Bang. If the Big Bang actually occurred, scientists believe that we should see slight variations or ripples in the temperature of the cosmic background radiation that Penzias and Wilson had discovered. These temperature ripples enabled matter to congregate by gravitational attraction into galaxies. If found, they would comprise the fourth line of scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. In 1989, the search for these ripples was intensified when NASA launched the $200 million satellite, aptly called COBE, or C-O-B-E, for Cosmic Background Explorer. Carrying extremely sensitive instruments, COBE was able to see whether or not these ripples actually existed in the background radiation and how precise they were. Now, when the project leader, astronomer George Smoot, announced COBE's findings in 1992, his shocking characterization was quoted in newspapers all over the world. He said, "If you're religious, it's like looking at God." This is what he said, and I'm not sure if this guy was a Christian or whether he wasn't a Christian here, and after seeing this, he was. But this was an incredible scientific discovery because it confirmed that there was a beginning of the universe. And as we've said before, we understand that if there was a beginning of the universe, there must have been a beginner of the universe. And finally, the last letter in this acronym SURGE is E, and it stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. Now, the E in SURGE is for Einstein. His theory for general relativity is the fifth line of scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning, and its discovery was the beginning of the end for the idea that the universe is eternal. The theory itself, which has been verified to 5 decimal places, demands an absolute beginning for time, space, and matter. It shows that time, space, and matter are correlative. That is, they are interdependent. You cannot have one without the others. So you cannot have time, that was from the book, that last paragraph, and you cannot have time without space and matter. You cannot have space without time and matter, etc., etc. They have to be correlative. They are interdependent. Now, in light of all of this scientific evidence, we can conclude that the universe did have a beginning, okay? And this is not just a fairy tale now. This is not just people making up stuff to give themselves hope or make themselves feel better. Instead, no, this is scientific evidence that the universe did have a beginning. And if it had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. And so in light of all of this evidence, this gives us the answer to our question, is the universe eternal, or is the thing that caused it eternal? And the answer is that the thing that caused the universe must be eternal, and it must be timeless. And here's some more characteristics. If time, space, and matter all came into existence at one time, or at once, then something timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, and we'll also add in powerful and personal, because these are some of the characteristics we see in our world today, must have created the universe. I'll repeat that again. Something timeless, spaceless, immaterial, powerful, and personal must have created the universe, based on the evidence which we have just looked at. And funny enough, these are the characteristics of God. God is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, powerful, and personal. And so I think this acronym SURGE is a brilliant way of remembering scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning, and therefore it had a beginner. It had someone or something, because we're not quite there to proving that it was the Christian God yet. We will get to that, but this scientific evidence just goes to show that there was some, you may call it a force, or I would call it God, that created the universe. But we're not done here. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a quick look at the fine-tuning of the universe. And this is another factor which goes to show that the universe was created, rather than just some random explosion. And so I'm going to list off a few facts, and these are called anthropic principles. In other words, they are things which are so precise in order for life to exist here on Earth, and there's so many of them that we're going to look at, and it goes to show that it really takes a lot of faith to be an atheist, as that book is titled. And I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I think it's a great leap of faith to believe that we just randomly got here from nothing. I think it's impossible. But anyway, enough of that. We're going to go and look at some of these anthropic principles, or some of the facts about the fine-tuning. So the first one, the sun is 150 million kilometers away from us, and it's just the right distance from Earth to ripen our tomatoes. If we were 1% closer to the sun, or 1% further away from the sun, life wouldn't be possible. The next one, if the initial explosion of the Big Bang had differed in strength by as little as 1 part in 10 to the power of 60, which is 1 with 60 zeros after it, the universe would have either quickly collapsed back on itself or expanded too rapidly for stars to form. In either case, life would be impossible. Now, as John Jefferson Davis points out, an accuracy of 1 part in 10 with 60 zeros after it can be compared to firing a bullet at a 1-inch target on the other side of the observable universe 20 billion light years away and hitting the target. In other words, there is the chance that it was just randomly like this. If the Big Bang just happened to be the right speed and the right strength, that's how unlikely it was. Another one here, we've got calculations by Brandon Carter showed that if gravity had been stronger or weaker by 1 part in 10 with 40 zeros in it, in other words, 0.00040 times 0.1, or 0.0000040 times and then 1%, then life-sustaining stars like the sun could not exist, and this would most likely make life impossible. Again, we've got something which is just, it's such a tiny, tiny chance. The odds are definitely in the favor of there being a creator. If the moon moved closer to the earth by just a fifth, the tides would be so enormous that twice a day they would reach 35 to 50 feet higher over most of the surface of the earth. Wow, so that's another nicely finely tuned universe. Another finely tuned constant is the strong nuclear force, which is the force that holds atoms together. The sun burns by fusing hydrogen and higher elements together. When the two hydrogen atoms fuse, 0.7% of the mass of the hydrogen is converted into energy. If the amount of matter converted was slightly smaller, if it was 0.6% instead of 0.7%, a proton could not bond to a neutron, and the universe would only consist of hydrogen. With no heavy elements, there would be no rocky planets and no life. If the amount of matter converted was slightly larger, at 0.8%, fusion would happen so readily and rapidly that no hydrogen would have survived from the Big Bang. Again, there would be no solar systems and no life. The number must lie exactly between 0.6% and 0.8%. Now again, we're seeing that there's such fine variations in all of these constants. Oxygen comprises 21% of the atmosphere. If it were at 25%, fires would erupt spontaneously, and if it were at 15%, we would all suffocate. So thank you God, that the oxygen is at the right percentage, and I think it just goes to show again the fine tuning of the universe is incredible. If CO2 levels that they're just right, any higher and a greenhouse effect would happen, and we would all burn up. Any lower and plants wouldn't grow, and again would all suffocate. If Jupiter wasn't in its current orbit, we would be bombarded by constant space material, because it acts as a cosmic vacuum cleaner. It sucks away with its gravity the meteorites and asteroids which otherwise would come towards Earth. Now, astrophysicist Hugh Ross has calculated that the probability that these and other constants, and there's 122 of these constants and principles, we've just mentioned a few here, so he's calculated that the probability that these ones and the other constants, 122 in all, would exist today for any other planet in the universe by chance, i.e., for example, without a divine designer. Now, assuming that is 10 to the power of 22, 10 with 22 zeros after it, planets in the universe, which is a very large number, his answer is shocking. There would be one chance in 10 with 138 zeros after it. That's one chance in 1 with 138 zeros after it. Now, to give you some context, there are only 10 with 70 zeros after it atoms in the entire universe. So the chance for another planet having the fine variations required for life in this universe with no divine design, the chance is about 1 in 10 with 138 zeros following it. That's an incredibly small chance. There are less atoms in the universe than there are that number. So in effect, there is zero chance that any planet in the universe would have the life-supporting conditions that we have unless there is an intelligent designer behind it all. And as the book states, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I think it requires a significantly larger amount of faith, and blind faith that is as well, to believe that we just got here by chance, to believe that all these constants just happened and that all these things just happened randomly. No, I believe that there was a divine designer behind it all. There must have been. If we deny this, we're lying to ourselves. Common sense tells us that everything which has a beginning must have had to have a beginner. I think it takes a great leap of faith to be an atheist. And at the start of the podcast, I said that the most important question was, is God real? And I think we've shown plenty of evidence that he is. However, we're not going to finish with this evidence. As I mentioned before, maybe with this evidence we've proved that there is some thing before the universe. Call it God, call it a force, call it whatever you want. But now we have to look in and see, is there evidence for a designer? Is it a personal designer who wants to have a relationship with us? And which God is it? Is it the God of Christianity, or is it the God of Judaism, or is it the God of Islam? So we're going to be looking at this in the next few weeks. And next week, or on the next podcast, we're going to be looking at the complexity of DNA and how this goes to show that there was an intelligent designer. So I hope you've learned a lot and you got to hear all this evidence. We'll see you next time on The Garrison.